Okay, we are going to now move to a rolling coverage of what is happening there in Afghanistan, which is quite a defeat for the U.S., as it's obvious based on the 20 years of their military presence, along with international forces. Today is the day that the announcement has been made, and it's official. U.S. forces have withdrawn from that country. At this point, we're going to cross on over first to the airport to get the latest update from our correspondent, Amin Alami, who's at the site there at the airport. To tell us more. I mean, at this point, again, give us a recap about where things stand. As we know, and as you have said, the U.S. forces have pulled out of the country after 20 years.
Well, today, August 31st, is the first day that the Taliban are in full charge of Kabul International Airport after the full withdrawal of all American forces from this key international airport. The withdrawal of American forces from Kabul International Airport has faced several reactions inside the country. For instance, just hours after the full withdrawal of all American forces from here, the Taliban spokesman Zabihullah Mujahid joined a press conference just here. I'm standing, and said that this is a great victory for the people of Afghanistan. And today is considered as the day when Afghanistan is known as an independent country around the world. He also emphasized that we are after having good relations with the rest of countries worldwide. He stressed that their priorities are to boost their ties with Afghanistan's neighboring countries as well as the regional countries, and after that to make good ties, good relations, and boost those relations with the international community. Where I'm standing is inside Kabul International Airport, and behind me there are some aircrafts of Afghan national airline known as Ariana Afghan Airline. Some military vehicles are also here that are currently being used by the Taliban. For instance, these American Humvee are the vehicles, and this fort. And that side, you can see there is the military part of Kabul International Airport that was under full control of the American forces before the withdrawal. Inside those hangars, there are many aircrafts, including helicopters and Chinooks. In the meantime, the Taliban sources say that most of those helicopters and aircrafts are damaged. But according to Zabihullah Mujahid, the spokesman of the Taliban, the group is committed to fix those aircrafts and helicopters and use them as military power of Afghanistan's coming government. However, the Taliban spokesman also said that there is any pretext for the rest of terrorist groups in Afghanistan, including Daesh, to pick up guns and wage further war inside this country, because he said that American forces have left Afghanistan. There is any foreign troop inside Afghanistan now, and that is why insisting on any war under the name of any pretext, including the holy war or jihad, is not acceptable for the people of Afghanistan as well as for the Taliban. As you see behind me, the American forces have left behind many things, including military vehicles and military equipment, ammunitions, beverage, and some other things. However, some top military commanders of Taliban are currently getting inside this key airport via these vehicles. You can see that there is a Taliban commander. I talked to him earlier. He said that I'm ready to talk to you about the ongoing situation here in Kabul International Airport, and he insisted that we are planning to make a final agreement with Qatar and Turkey in order to manage issues inside Kabul International Airport. In the meantime, they say that in case the Daesh terrorist group insists on waging war in Afghanistan or resisting against the Taliban, then the Taliban members would be ready to fully pound them all over Afghanistan. For instance, they said that we have so far pounded several positions of Daesh terrorist groups, mainly and their so-called stronghold in Nangarhar province of eastern Afghanistan.
Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Amin Alami there from Afghanistan's Kabul International Airport, giving us the latest there. Let's get some analysis into the picture. We have David McBride, who's a former Australian Army legal officer who joins us from Sydney. And we also like to welcome John Bosnitch, who's a journalist and political consultant, joining us from Belgrade. I'd like to welcome you both. And David McBride, let me first start with you. You know, when you take a look at this, you cannot ignore the fact that there's got to be some, I'm guessing, deep thinking somewhere in the corridors of the Pentagon as to what happened in the past 20 years. Of course, then there's the side where they say that the real winners here, even though the U.S. appears to be the losers, but the real winners are the military contractors who were involved in this 20-year war to the tune of what is down on paper, $2.261 trillion. It could be a lot more than that.
There's no doubt they were the real winners. They have made millions. People like Dick Cheney and his companies, they have made billions out of it. There won't be anyone in the Pentagon who was surprised by this and who didn't know this was going to happen. The standard joke when I was over there was, it was all right when we left, in that everybody knew it was going to collapse as soon as everybody went, in that it was only ever a facade. The best thing the Americans could do now is to admit that and not try and fight some sort of dirty war after the fact, and actually apologise and try to work with the Taliban to actually improve the country. The Taliban have said they want to work with the Americans. They could have easily been full of vengeance and pride, but they've said we want to start afresh, which is good. The Americans, if they really want to show that they are superior people, need to say, we will work with you now and wipe the slate clean.
Okay, John Bosnitch, there has been some speculation as to the fact that the Americans actually, even though they have perhaps physically withdrawn themselves, even though there's some question marks there, that maybe some special ops U.S. service members may be in the country without, obviously, the U.S. making that public knowledge, that the U.S. is actually not going to leave the Taliban alone, maybe use the Taliban in some ways to perhaps move on to other military adventures that would be in the Southeast Asia region, in particular towards China maybe, or maybe Russia. How do you think that that scenario could exist?
And not only could exist, it's 100% certain that America, especially the CIA and the military intelligence organizations, have left behind not only hundreds, if not thousands of operatives, but they've also left behind a number of situations and planned booby traps to use against the new Taliban government if they don't come to an understanding. The Americans, like any pan-national empire which tries to take over the entire globe, tries to keep its fingers in every pot. So there's 100% certainty that the CIA is still there. There's 100% certainty that there are still contracted spies and operatives still there with potential opposition groups to the new Taliban government. And we can be sure that unless the Taliban comes to some kind of an agreement with the United States, which they probably will not if they're intelligent, we can see that the United States will attempt to use whatever it can of the situation in Afghanistan against both China and Russia, as they did when they first intervened many, many years before, 20 years ago. The Americans have been in this region since the late 1970s and causing trouble since then.
Well, you know, it's very confusing, David McBride, when you take a look, not confusing, but it's just startling, to be honest with you, when you take a look at this last phase of the 20 years, in particular, obviously, this shambolic withdrawal of U.S. and international forces from the country. In particular, the U.S., when you think about the fact that it was this war on terror that began 20 years ago, it ended the way that it did. You had this Daesh Khorasan that bombed Kabul airport, and then the U.S. Said, okay, we're going to go after and kill the planner, and said that it did that. it just it defies logic as to the way that the U.S. executed its last phase. That was is such a mess that my question to you would be if that is somewhat of a reflection of the way that this war actually went on for the past 20 years. Because many have said, especially the Washington papers, I don't know if you recall that, that how disorganized this whole operation was throughout the 20 years.
Yeah, it was no surprise to anyone that was there in that the last day revealed what it was all along, in that it was a bit like a movie set. Everything was fake. The gains were fake, the governments were fake, our heroes were fake, even some of our villains were fake. And this is the problem that America has when they fight wars with public relations. They tried to win the war by saying they were winning the war. They tried, and then they actually started believing their own propaganda. They started to say, the Taliban have no support amongst the people. The people love us. All of this was false, and everybody knew it. That's the terrible thing. All the senior people in the US administration and the Australian and the Brit, they knew it was a lie. And as soon as the bombs stopped falling, the reality came out. The people did not like the Americans. The people saw them as an invading force. They saw the Afghan army that the Americans sponsored as a puppet collaborator army. And the Taliban were, at least, for whatever faults they had, at least they were a grassroots organisation, and they had been the de facto government of the country. So it was just like the emperor's new clothes. America had not improved the people's lives in Afghanistan. They had just made contractors rich. There's a theory that that's all they really wanted to do. They won elections by dropping bombs on Islamic people, because that kind of made them look strong. But it was never what they claimed to be. It was never a peaceful democracy. And the curtain came down at the end, but that was the reality being revealed.
John Bosnitch, this question gets asked over and over again, and many are left in the dark as to why this didn't happen. And the question is how can the U.S., along with its allies that were in that country from NATO countries, who have the most sophisticated, as they have said, the most sophisticated weapons, airplanes, military equipment, you name it, but they were not able to defeat the Taliban. I mean, at the height of it, I think there were 150,000 international forces from ISAF there. And really, the Taliban continued to wage their war throughout the 20 years. Why do you think the U.S. was not able to defeat it, unless there was really no intention to do so in the first place?
Well, I would say that they did intend to defeat the Taliban. They did not know what they were dealing with. They also thought that the war on the Taliban was just a war on a group that they had originally supported against, various different regimes in the pre-Taliban era. The United States has had its fingers in this mess since, as I said, before the beginning of this 20-year war. They were the ones who tried to interfere in the region to take the Soviets out of the region. So this is a complete mess of American creation. It is not something that happened organically and America intervened as they said they did to bring peace and to bring order. They sowed the war. They sowed the disorder. They sowed the mass killing. And they thought that because their own public is totally uninformed, because they have a dictatorship over their own media, so the American public has no idea what's happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in Iran, what's happening in China, what's happening anywhere. They thought that in the darkness of their media monopoly, they could pull off a victory, but they didn't count on the people. If the people of a land do not want to be occupied and do not want to change their culture and their religion, then that will not happen. And Americans are going to learn this lesson as their empire continues to fall. And we are having the privilege of seeing an aggressive, warlike empire fall in our lifetimes.
Well, the thing that is perplexing John Bosnitch, looking at, I'm sorry, David McBride, looking at the next moves that the U.S. wants to make, how does it expect to actually go after, for example, China? Right now it's in the U.S.'s radar. I mean, when you take a look at the way that the U.S. has actually not won a war, really, if you take a look at it, this being the most perfect example at this point in time. How does the U.S. military expect to even go after, China if it has failed miserably in this particular war after 20 years?
That's a good question. That's right. They try to say the technology will win the wars. Of course, the technology salesmen say that. They haven't won a war, as you said, since maybe the Second World War. And they will be desperate for some sort of flashpoint with China. There's no doubt about it. Wars win elections. Wars won elections for Bush, for Obama, and they won elections for Blair and the Australian equivalents. So that they will want some sort of a flashpoint with China. I think Biden was hoping that they would get one over Taiwan, and that would distract people from Afghanistan. It not only sells arms, and the great thing about Russia and China is they're quite technologically advanced, and so they can, the arms dealers can sell very expensive aircraft, etc. But they will be looking for another flashpoint. You've even seen it when they're talking about the UFOs in America. There are theories that the reason that the Americans are releasing information about possible alien contact is so they can justify arms spending of extremely expensive equipment in order to perhaps fight aliens. The war is obviously war against enemies, whoever they might be, is good for the US business, and it's generally good for politicians to get elected. It's a sad state of affairs. And as Mr. Bosnitch said, it is because they managed to fool the people, but the people have to pay for all of this, and the people are the ones that suffer in these endless wars and usually needless wars.
Well, that's the whole thing. You talk about how the U.S. can fool people, and especially it's sad when it comes to the U.S. taxpayers. But John Bosnitch, take a listen to some of these statements and revelations that came out years ago in the Afghanistan papers, like Bob Crowley, who's a retired Army colonel. The strategy became self-validating. Every data point was altered to present the best picture possible in terms of how U.S. officials failed to tell the public about the truth of the war in Afghanistan. Or how about this one from Donald Rumsfeld, who's no longer in existence? I have no visibility into who the bad guys are. Or Douglas Lute, Army Lieutenant General, who served at the White House as Afghanistan war czar. We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. I mean, they were involved in this war for so long, and yet these are the type of confessions that they have made. I mean, what does that say about the U.S. trying to get into other war scenarios?
This is like going to see a play. I can actually remember seeing this myself as a young boy. I went to a play in which there were actors playing the hero and the nemesis. And as a young boy, I was taken in by the play. And I thought the hero was the hero and the nemesis was the nemesis, and there was evil being defeated by the hero. And then after the play, since I lived in a small town, we went to a restaurant. I went with my parents. We went to a restaurant, and in the restaurant, I saw the two actors who were the hero and the nemesis sitting together at the table, laughing and cheering each other with drinks. The war in Afghanistan is a play, not for the people who were murdered, not for the innocent tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of victims on the ground, but it was a play by the people who really rule America. That's not the government of America. That's the military-industrial complex. And for them, it doesn't matter how many people die. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever if the people dying raises the profits in weapons sales. And so for them, for the real rulers of America, the Afghan war was a flying success. They made billions, hundreds of billions on this war. They deployed themselves to the middle of Asia. They came there via this war to threaten Iran, to threaten China, to threaten Russia. And they are still there in the region. So they have held a play. The world has watched the play. People who watch the play think the play ended with the bad guys being beaten. But in fact, the people who are running this whole show are a theatrical company, and they've made the profits on the play no matter what story, what lie they told to the world. And that's the danger of all of this, that none of these wars are a loss for the American military industrial complex, which just uses the people of America as raw material in a human meat grinder. That's the story of Afghanistan, and that's the story of all of their wars.
David McBride, if I can get your reaction on what this Marine General Frank McKenzie has said. He's the head of the U.S. Central Command. He said they wanted us out. We wanted to get out with our people. And then this is where it gets interesting, what he said. He said, finally, I do believe the Taliban is going to have their hands full with ISIS-K or Daesh-K, Khorasan, and they let a lot of these people out of prisons, and now they're going to be able to reap what they sowed. What do you make of that statement? And the part that is raising alarm bells when I read this or look at it is the fact that how it says the Taliban is going to have their hands full with what it refers to as ISIS-K. There's been associations that have been made with the U.S. and Daesh terrorists, whether covertly or indirectly. What do you make of that statement?
I wouldn't take anything an American two-star general says that seriously. They're politicians. They'll say, unfortunately, they are pretty shallow thinkers, and the 20-year war shows that. That's not just me saying it. If they couldn't beat the Taliban after 20 years, they're not exactly that good. Now, in relation to ISIS-K, the Taliban executed the leaders of ISIS-K. That's more than the Americans have ever done. Now, the Americans said that they sent a missile into a vehicle, but it's highly suspect. Again, it's theatre. The Americans like to do things like that for theatre, but the Taliban have actually put a severe dent in ISIS. And the problem with the Americans is they're sponsoring people like the so-called Northern Alliance, which is probably nothing but a CIA front, as Mr. Bosnitch said. And on the one hand, they're leaving Afghanistan to the Taliban, but they're likely to fight some dirty sour grapes war where they will sponsor people who have no credibility, such as the Northern Alliance, to fight some sort of insurgency, which is madness. They should need to acknowledge that the Taliban are the de facto government, and they shouldn't be sponsoring any separatist groups any more than other countries should be sponsoring separatist groups in the United States. They would see that as an act of war, and if America gets involved or doesn't even help or does anything in order to destabilise Afghanistan, and they probably almost certainly will through sanctions, etc., it would be a very sad but typical thing. And it's very sour grapes for them to say, oh, the Americans, that is, to say, oh, ISIS is going to be a problem for the Taliban. The Taliban have made a big dent in ISIS-K, and the Taliban have showed good faith by executing the leaders. More people were killed by, more Taliban were killed by ISIS the other day than Americans. And the Americans should be patting the Taliban on the back for being better at fighting terrorism than they are.
Thank you very much for that, John. David McBride, former Australian Army legal officer from Sydney. Thank you for your comments. John Bosnitch, thank you, journalist and political consultant from Belgrade.